we hit on prescription medications there, some of them very powerful. And I think that's a good segue into the topic of substances in general, not necessarily food, but other things that we put into our body. So what am I talking about? Alcohol is one of them. Various drugs like, marijuana or nicotine. And then after that, you get into the really hard stuff. And then also, something as mild as caffeine. What approach should we take to these substances as Christians? I'll let you go first.
Well, we're going to wade out into it when we get into this. This is a touchy subject for a lot of people, and there are going to be various opinions. And so what I would like to do is to try to get people to think about these things from a spiritual standpoint and to think about them in a fresh way, right? Now, let me just state where I'm at right up front, okay? I'm a teetotaler. I do not drink alcohol. I do drink caffeine. I don't do other drugs. I avoid medications whenever possible. So the ones that I don't smoke. So I try to avoid those things. I do drink coffee, which has caffeine in it. And you and I have had numerous conversations about this. We don't necessarily see eye to eye on this whole topic. My general thing is I do not want something that's altering my decision-making ability, that's skewing how I think about things, that's loosening my tongue. Mm-hmm. I've been in the business world many years. I have been to countless business dinners, parties, all these kind of things, okay? When it comes to alcohol, I'm around many people that drink alcohol. I have many friends, both inside and outside the church, that drink alcohol. And what I have found is it does change their behavior. If I'm around them and they're drinking, I don't want that for myself. I don't need that to be happy. I don't need that to find joy. I don't need it to relax. Mm-hmm. So why would I even go there? Why would I open myself to that? That's my position on it. The interesting thing is, if you will study it, a lot of people will say, well, I drink, a shot of whiskey at night because it helps me sleep. Well, it might help you sleep initially, but as that breaks down in your body, it actually hinders your sleep. Mm-hmm. And there's really no, and then people might push back against this, if you're talking about red wine or something like that, there's really no valid health argument that says I have to have alcohol to be healthy. Yeah. I think most people might make an argument like that just to justify their position on it.
I will say the only credible thing that I've heard in favor of alcohol consumption involves consuming it in very small amounts.
Yeah.
Which seems to be what Scripture would have us to do.
Yeah, and the Scripture does speak positively. There are some Scriptures, and my conservative Christian friends and even family, I would say, don't like those verses because I was raised a teetotaler. I think there's a lot of value in being a teetotaler, but the Scripture does say what it says, and oftentimes those verses we attempt to mitigate them by saying, well, the wine that they had in the Bible was not near the potency of what we have now. It wasn't really the same thing. And, I haven't studied the details of it, but based on what the Scripture says, it is mind altering. Mm-hmm. If you look at the Scriptures that speak about it, whatever they had did change their mental state, because it talks about drinking it to be glad, and it warns against it in some cases because it does distort your thinking. So they were not just drinking grape juice. They were drinking something that was distorting their thinking.
Yeah.
So I don't want us to try to explain those things away.
Right.
Paul told Timothy to have a little wine for his stomach. That was almost like a medicinal use of alcohol. Mm-hmm. Which, by the way, when you're drinking NyQuil, you're drinking some alcohol. It might be the same as having a beverage. So anyway, that's a starting point. I know you probably have things to say on it.
Sure. All that I ask with alcohol is that we have a biblically based conversation about it. I don't have an axe to grind here.
Mm-hmm.
I've never had a drop of alcohol in my life, and I don't have any plans to. Yet often I find in these conversations, I'm sort of the alcohol apologist. And the reason is I do not think it's possible to read the entire scripture and come away from it with the idea that drinking alcohol is sinful per se. Now, can it be? Yes. And if you're a person who is predisposed to alcoholism, maybe absolute abstinence is what you need to do, is what the Lord would require of you. Everyone has a different relationship with this stuff. And the argument that I've heard growing up by the teetotaler camp is that the alcohol content was a lot less in the wine that they drank in the Bible. And, its fermentation made it safer for consumption than water. And that's why they drank it. That's why Jesus drank it. And you alluded to it earlier. I just have to point out this verse in Psalm 104. It's this beautiful description of the way the Lord made creation. And in verse 15, it says, "And wine to gladden the heart of man, oil to make his face shine, and bread to strengthen man's heart." That wine to gladden the heart of man shows that it is the alcoholic effect on mood that is a part of its value. It's not the fact that it's fermented and therefore safer than water. So let's just be honest about that, for one. Now, some people, will react to this strongly and take their liberty to drink wine and wave it in people's faces. That is not pleasing to the Lord at all. And when it comes to respecting others, the answer is never more liberty, but more abstinence. And this is something that we could apply even to diet. A lot of people who are on a diet, if they're Christians especially, probably has something to do with a sort of pang of conscience. And Paul talks about this extensively in Romans 14 and in 1 Corinthians 8. We don't have time to go through them, but both chapters are worth reading in their entirety to really grasp this issue of not causing your brother to stumble. So the practical implication of that, if I could just skip to the end of the whole conversation about that, is just that if you have someone close to you who is dieting or who is abstaining from, say, alcohol or really anything else on the basis of conscience, you would do well to abstain for their sakes, not to tempt them or not to weaken their conscience. Even if their conscience, and this is the key thing, is founded upon something that's not really true. What Paul was talking about at the time was eating food offered to idols. Paul said, idols aren't real. There's no difference between food offered to idols and food not offered. But some people, they think that it is, and therefore it hurts their conscience. It's more important to protect their conscience than it is to correct how they're living. Maybe you're a person who thinks that a vegan diet is the way to go, and you have a person who you're eating with who thinks the carnivore diet is the way to go. What you might want to do is, put your finger in your face and correct them. But if they're acting on conscience and abstaining on conscience, you need to respect that always. So a little aside there. Do you want to comment on that before we continue to talk about substances?
Yeah, so from a practical standpoint, if you were hosting a dinner party and you happen to be someone who drinks alcohol and you've got a recovering alcoholic friend who's coming, maybe don't get the alcohol out. These are just practical things that we need to be sensitive to others in alignment with the verses that you have just shared.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to say a couple more things here. So I don't want to get into the whole conversation about caffeine. I do not abstain from caffeine. I drink caffeine regularly. I don't think it's sinful or anything like that. But there are some things that we need to know about caffeine. First of all, caffeine is a psychoactive drug. The only psychoactive drug that we regularly give children, interestingly enough. It does develop a physical dependence, and it does jeopardize your sleep, especially if you drink it too late in the day. So it has a half-life of approximately 6 hours. So basically what that means is if you have a cup of coffee 6 hours before bed, when you go to bed, that half of that caffeine has not been filtered out of your blood yet. So it is as if you drank half a cup of coffee right before bed.
Right.
Probably not a good idea. Now, you can develop such a tolerance to it that you can go to sleep even though you have had the caffeine, but your sleep quality will be impacted. So do know that, and sleep is extremely important, and we're going to talk about that in just a second. Now, the approach that I take to all of these substances is simply, all things are lawful for me, but not all things are helpful. All things are lawful for me, but I will not be dominated by anything. This is what Paul says in 1 Corinthians 6. The question is not, are these substances sinful in themselves? It's, are they helpful? Are they dominating us? There are some hard drugs that you take one hit of them and you are addicted then, right? We need to stay away from that.
Well, I've got some very good friends. We recently had a conversation. These are people who historically have drank alcohol. They're spiritually minded people. And we had a group conversation about this. And essentially what I challenged them to do was examine your motivation for drinking and see what that really is and look at the impact of it. And I can tell you, not all of them abstained from alcohol, but I can tell you that some of them did that, and they said, you know what, I'm going to try it without it. And the report that came back from an alcohol standpoint was that they were better without it than they were with it. It was having, in total summation, a negative consequence on their life. And so that would be my thing with people. Just really take a hard look at, is it really being helpful to you or not? What is the purpose that you're doing it for? And, you know, that, to me, that would be any drug that you're on. We didn't cover some of the ones that from a historical Christian standpoint would be absolutely, you don't touch it, you know, like marijuana or things like that. And I know some of the younger generation has different views on that, which I do not agree with, but nevertheless, it's out there. If anything you're putting in your body, a drug or food or anything, we need to weigh it against what's it really doing to me, and does it align with Scripture?
Right. And why am I doing it? Yeah, that's a good question to ask.